Hey guys, we are going to talk today about reproduction. So reproduction is the method of producing offspring and passing on genes to those offspring. There are two main types of reproduction that we're going to talk about, and they are asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. We'll start by looking at asexual reproduction. Keep in mind, anytime you put an A in front of a word like that, it's going to be not or without. So asexual reproduction is reproduction without sex. And what that means is that there's only one parent that is passing on all of its genes to its offspring. So this means that the offspring are going to be genetically identical to their parents. Sometimes we call these clones, because genetically they are exactly the same. Now, even though most of the things that we see around us, or like the animals that we think of, reproduce sexually, lots and lots of organisms reproduce asexually. So you want to keep that in mind. It's not as uncommon as maybe you might think it is. Over on the side here, I've got a couple different examples of asexual reproduction. At the very top, we have mitosis. And so this is when you have unicellular organisms, or organisms that are only one cell big. Sometimes they will reproduce just through mitosis, which we learned about last semester. The next example is binary fission in amoeba. And so again, you're starting with one parent, and it is dividing into two. And so you've got the two daughter cells, so you now have the two amoebas. And then in the third example, you have budding happening in a hydra. And so you can see that the hydra is right here, and this bud is produced, and now you have the hydra over there. It is a genetic clone of the parent. So there are some advantages to asexual reproduction. The first is you only need one parent, so you don't have to find a mate. When you're ready to reproduce, you can, and that is actually a huge advantage. If you were ready to reproduce and you are a sexually reproducing organism and you can't find somebody to mate with, you can't reproduce. So only needing one parent is an advantage. Offspring are identical to the parent, and that can be an advantage for asexual reproduction if that parent is a really healthy, very good individual. Then passing on all of those genes is a good thing. And so those good genetic traits are going to be conserved and reproduced and passed on to the next generation. So you keep passing on these good traits, that's a good thing. That is definitely an advantage. However, there are also a few disadvantages to asexual reproduction. The first is that there's no new DNA combinations. So you're not increasing variation, you're not getting different types of individuals in the population, and that can be a really bad thing. So clones can easily become extinct if they're attacked by a certain disease or pest. So if there's not any variation in the population, if a disease comes in, it could end up wiping out all of the individuals because they're genetically the same. And so if the disease affects one, it's going to affect all of them. Next, we're going to look at sexual reproduction. With sexual reproduction, you're going to have two parents contributing DNA to an offspring. So in this example, you've got an egg and a sperm cell coming together at fertilization, an embryo is formed, and then you can see you've got the offspring at the end there. Now there are some, obviously, advantages to sexual reproduction as well. So offspring is going to have a unique combination of DNA, which could be an improvement over both parents. You're also going to have more variation or differences within the population, and this is always a good thing. Variation in a population is really beneficial. And so that is one of the major advantages of sexual reproduction. Now again, there are going to be some disadvantages as well. Number one, you need two parents. So you need to be able to find a mate in order to reproduce if you are a sexually reproducing organism. Now, a lot of times that's not a huge problem, but when you look at animals in nature, things like deforestation and habitat fragmentation, it could become quite a bit harder for some animals to find mates. You could also potentially lose good gene combinations. If you have two really successful parents that mate, their offspring may not actually be an improvement over the parents, and so the offspring could actually be worse off than their parents were, and obviously that would be a disadvantage as well. And just to, throw in a little surprise, some organisms can actually do both. They can actually reproduce sexually and asexually. And it depends on the organism, so not all things can do this. And some organisms have both phases within their life cycle, so they reproduce sexually sometimes and asexually other times. And then you've got some types of plants that reproduce sexually through pollination. So if they get pollinated, like a bee comes in, drops off pollen from another flower or another plant, they can reproduce sexually. But then you also have plants that can send off shoots or runners or bulblets, which are little parts of the plant that can move to a new area, and they essentially just grow into a whole new plant that is genetically identical to the parent. And so that is considered asexual reproduction. So again, you have some organisms that can reproduce sexually and asexually, and so they are just increasing the number of offspring that they can have because they're going to be able to reproduce sexually when it's good. In some cases, if they're getting pollinated and they're able to increase variation. Other times, though, if it's more beneficial to some plants to just create outgrowths so that they can make shoots or they can make bulblets, they are going to create genetically identical offspring. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. All right, guys, thanks for watching.